Hello and welcome to FPVtips. I'm George and today we're having a look at the RunCam 5. It's finally here, RunCam's latest GoPro competitor camera, the RunCam 5. In the meantime, GoPro has discontinued the Session 5, many FPV pilots' favorite camera, leaving people with the option to grab a refurbished one from eBay, buy a used one from elsewhere, or move on to use the Hero 6 with a slightly different form factor. This is where the RunCam's new offering comes in. I'm very interested in the RunCam 5 camera. My excitement stems mainly from the fact that RunCam specializes in making FPV cameras and does that exceptionally well. Furthermore, I have been using RunCam Split cameras for over a year now, and I'm very pleased with the FPV feed while flying, as well as the 1080p HD video recording. So is the RunCam 5 a worthy competitor and costing only $100, fraction of the price of a GoPro? Is it an option to consider switching to? Let's find out. RunCam's products almost always offer a premium unboxing experience with almost Apple-like quality. This one comes in a solid hard cardboard box with a slide on top. Inside, we find the camera sitting in the middle of a bed of sponge-like soft material, wrapped from all sides. The lens has a protective plastic layer that needs to be peeled off before usage. We also notice a single button on top and an LED. On the left hand side there is a micro USB port for charging or connecting to a computer for accessing the SD card contents without taking out the SD card. On the right hand side there is a sliding panel that with slit open exposes the SD card slot where you can put your memory card. Slide it shut and your SD card is decently protected from getting lost while you're flying. Above the SD card slot there is a reset button should you ever need to use it. In addition, you get a manual and a small box with a few accessories. Inside that box we find a USB to micro USB cable for charging and video downloads and two high quality rubberized Velcro straps. The straps are indeed of decent quality and the rubberized coating definitely helps a ton with gripping tightly around the camera. Next, let's look at the specifications. One of the most outstanding features of the RunCam 5 is actually its weight. It's by far one of the, if not the lightest cameras in its class. It comes in at just 56 grams. That's very light. In comparison, the Hero 5 Session weighs 74 grams. Here is the rest of the technical specifications. In terms of dimensions, they're quite similar to the GoPro Hero Session 5, and that means that the RunCam 5 would fit in no existing TPU mounts. I, for example, used this mount and had no issues fitting it. The fit is nice and snug, and you can also use one of the provided rubberized Velcro straps to hold the camera in place extra tight if you need that. As far as battery capacity goes, RunCam claims the built-in 960 mAh battery should get you more than 90 minutes of 1080p 60 fps recording time, or about 60 minutes of 4K 30 fps recording time. And yes, the battery is irreplaceable, built-in battery, which might be one of the necessary shortcuts RunCam had to take in order to drive the price of the camera so low. I personally don't mind at all that the battery is built in. To charge the RunCam 5, just use a micro USB port and DC current in the range of 5 volts to 15 volts. Onto the video specifications. The RunCam 5 has a 12 megapixel Sony sensor with a field of view of 145 degrees. The video output is in MP4 file format and it supports resolutions from 1080p to 4K, which we will dive deeper in a second. It's also worth noting that depending on what resolution and frame rate video you shoot, you will need a U1 or U3 SD card. The supported capacity is up to 128 gigs. The RunCam 5 does not support Wi-Fi connections, so let's look into what does it mean for setting the camera up. For the complete setup instructions, you can always refer to the RunCam 5 user manual, but here's a quick breakdown of how the camera button functions. If you long press the camera button, that would turn the camera on if it's off, or turn it off if it's on. That's indicated by a green LED or a lack thereof. A short press when the camera is on will start recording, indicated by a blinking green LED. A subsequent short press will stop recording, making the LED solid green. Double press when the camera is on will change it to setting mode, ready to read a QR code, and the LED will indicate that by changing to blue. To get up and running, we have to do a few things. We have to charge the camera up, insert the formatted SD card, choose your video settings, and mount it on a drone. You can charge the RunCam 5 via the micro USB port, plug it into a computer, and let it be until the LED goes off. That indicates that the battery is full. Next, insert a high quality formatted SD card with decent capacity. We'll be writing a lot of data and you need a fast card to do so. Don't underestimate also the formatting step, as it can save you from headaches and lost footage issues. If you are unable to format your SD card via a computer, you can also do that through the RunCam itself. Get a decent capacity card. I recommend at least 32 gigabytes, but you know yourself better, take what makes sense. Note that 4 or 5 battery packs yield usually about 6 to 7 gigs of footage easily. I mentioned the camera doesn't have a Wi-Fi connection capability, and it also doesn't have Bluetooth. So how do we change the settings on it? You see, RunCam 5's config lives in a file on the SD card. That file is called cameraconfig.ini, and there are at least a few ways to change the configuration. You could do that by changing the values in the config file or by using a QR code via the RunCam app. I personally prefer and recommend changing the settings via the QR code, but for the sake of being thorough, I would also show you how to do that by changing the config file itself manually. I do not recommend this approach, but there is nothing wrong with it, so here we go. To do that, first connect the camera to the computer via the micro USB. The LED will go red to indicate that the camera is charging. You want to press and hold the button for a couple of seconds to power on the camera, and this will in turn mount the SD card into your file system so you can access it. The LED will go green to indicate that the camera is on. Then you want to access the cameraconfig.ini file on the mounted SD card. Ideally, you should use an editor like Notepad++ or VS Code to edit the file in order to avoid issues. Here is an example of how part of my camera configuration looks like. At first, it might look like a lot, but in reality it's quite simple. The lines that start with a semicolon are comment lines. They are helpful messages for you to understand the functionality and have no programmatic meaning. RunCam has nicely listed those in comments all the possible options for a particular setting, as well as its default values. For example, if I wanted to change my video quality setting to low, why would I? But just for the sake of an example, I would change its value from 1 to 3. That's all there is to it. As I mentioned, I don't use this approach to change the settings, but it's a nice thing to know. The other way to change the settings on the RunCam 5 is by using the RunCam app, which you can get on the Google Play Store or on the iOS App Store. On the first screen, you need to select your product, in this case RunCam 5, and then tap the QR code configuration button. The video settings are broken down into two screens. The first, you're presented immediately, and it is called Video, as seen in the bottom of the navigation buttons. The other screen of options is called General, and you can access it by tapping the corresponding button in the bottom navigation. I'm not going to go in great detail over every single option. In fact, I think most of them are very self-explanatory. Video quality, you probably want to keep it high and have very little reason to use anything else. Loop recording would split your video recordings in 3-minute or so chunks of footage. I don't personally do that. I like starting and stopping my recordings manually. Auto record is something I don't use either. We can get in a bit more detail about the available resolutions in the next section. And volume probably you want to keep to low, as well as that's already pretty loud. And here is the general screen of video settings. Here you can turn off things like the RunCam logo and the date timestamp. You can flip the screen if you have mounted the RunCam 5 upside down. You can adjust a number of sensor settings such as the saturation, exposure compensation, contrast, sharpness, white balance. You do have to change the power supply frequency from 50 Hz to 60 Hz if you live in the USA, or keep 50 Hz if you live in EU. Clicking the three dots at the top right brings up a menu that allows you to restore the default settings or to format the SD card. Finally, clicking the apply button brings up a generated QR code that will apply the settings to your camera when read by it. To do that, power on the camera with a long press of the button. When the camera is on and the LED is solid green, double press the button. You will know you've done it right if the LED changes to blue, indicating that the camera is in setting mode. And then you can show the QR code to the camera and it will attempt to read it. You will know you've done it right if you hear a beep that notifies you that the camera has accepted the new settings, and then the LED will transition back to green mode. This may sound somewhat finicky at first, but it's actually very easy and straightforward, and dare I say fast to do. I did my tests on a Pixel 3 phone and I had no issues with the camera reading the code. The app will automatically increase the brightness of your phone screen while displaying the QR code, but if brightness is an issue for you, you can also print out the QR codes on a piece of paper and use that to change the settings. Finally, you have to mount the camera on a quad. There's probably many ways to do that. There is also plenty of projects you can 3D print on thingiverse.com, or you can also purchase a mount such as the one I'm using, for example. This mount worked pretty well. I attached it with a couple of thicker zip ties, and in addition ran around a rubberized Velcro strap for extra protection, which is definitely not necessary and quite an overkill. Let's finally get into the video settings. RunCam 5 offers you the following 7 resolutions and frame rate variants. One of the first tests I did was I went ahead and I recorded a sample 1-minute clip of me doing the same thing 7 times, each time with a different resolution option selected. You can check out the playlist in this channel, but here's the full disclaimer. All clips were recorded on the same day in sunny but late evening daylight conditions, flying against and away from the sun to really put the camera to the test. All clips were recorded using the default camera settings. The only thing being changed between flights was the resolution. There was no post-processing of the clips except whatever compression YouTube applies to the videos. You will notice that the available resolution options are 7 in the RunCam app, but the clips in the playlist are 8. That's because clip number 5 in the playlist demonstrates how dynamic stretching video works for 1440p videos. The other caveat is that you cannot really preview the full 120 FPS on video number 2, as YouTube only supports up to 60 FPS. Definitely have a look at all the different samples and let me know what you think. Here's the thing about FPV videos though. You are the judge of what you prefer watching and how you would like to express yourself in the videos you make. For instance, to me it's more important to have the video with buttery smooth 60 FPS than to have 4K resolution, for example. In fact, I don't think there even is a need for 4K at this point. 2.7K at 60 FPS would have been awesome, but unfortunately the RunCam 5 records 2.7K at up to 50 FPS. It's not the end of the world, but it sure is not 60 FPS. Since I got the RunCam 5, I've recorded a bunch of videos, and I've come up to use mostly the largest possible 60 FPS option, which is 1440p. Didn't like very much the linear stretch of the XV resolution options. What that does is basically it stretches the entire image. However, there is another way to stretch videos, namely dynamic stretching. I'm about to share with you a technique that I definitely want to give all credit to Joshua Bardwell for sharing, because that's how I found about it, and you should definitely check out his YouTube channel. The tool in question is called Superview and lives in an open source repository on GitHub. You should follow the requirements and installation instructions on the page, but in the end you want to do 2 things. You want to download and add FFmpeg to your path. There is a link in the README file in the repository. And you want to grab a copy of the Superview binary for your operating system. Links in the description. You can also check my blog post, again link in the description for the full detailed instructions. But in the end, you want to run the Superview software, you want to give it an input of your 1440 60 FPS video, and it's gonna calculate dynamically stretched mostly the sides of the video and less towards the center of the video, and then re-encode the entire video. Here's an example of how that looks, and I think personally that it's much better than linear stretch. I also ran a RunCam 5 versus RunCam Split 2 comparison. This part is a bit far-fetched for a number of reasons, and it's not necessarily very scientific, but I found it interesting nevertheless, and I wanted to share the findings. We are going to compare the footage between the two cameras. Why is this interesting? I've mentioned a number of times that I personally am a fan of split cameras. In fact, my raw unedited single pack flight footage YouTube channel is full of RunCam Split 2 and RunCam Split Mini and Cadex Turtle V2 videos. There is a lot of convenience in this setup and it works nicely if you need decent, although not the best of the best footage quality. Here are some things to keep in mind for this test. I'm using the RunCam Split 2, the original oldest version. Since then RunCam Split 2S has come out and it seems like a RunCam Split 3 might be underway. Both comparison videos are using stock camera settings. The RunCam 5 costs $100. The Split 2S costs $80. However, $20 to $30 of those $80 can be considered as the money you would anyway need to spend on an FPV camera for flying. So the actual money comparison ends up being something more like $100 for the RunCam 5 versus $50 Split 2S. You will also see the props and the standoffs or parts of the frame through the FPV camera, and you would not see those through the RunCam 5. Here's a small snippet of the test, and of course the full video is available as a standalone video on my channel. In conclusion then, so who is this not for? If you really want, need and must have the best of the best footage quality and you have a lot of money, then the answer is probably still GoPro for you. Although that gap is closing very fast and it's starting to be less and less of a factor. If you live in the States and you can grab a GoPro from Best Buy, that's still probably your best option, as you can then replace your broken units for a fraction of the price. But if you're anywhere else and you still want very crisp HD footage, then the RunCam 5 might be for you. I personally am very happy with the quality of the footage that comes out of the RunCam 5, especially the 1440p stretch at 60 FPS. And just for $100, the initial investment is really not that significant. Basically, you get 90% of a GoPro for 33% of its price. That's my personal opinion, and I love what RunCam 5 brings to the table. Most of all, at this price point, I'm sure it's going to make taking high quality HD footage accessible to many other people. Subscribe for more FPV tips, and happy flying!